I want to start actually by thanking Lori Gardenier, who is on the call with us, even though she's being quiet today. Um, I want to thank Lori. I want to thank Natalia Stone. I want to thank the whole Human Services team just for always being there for us. And no matter what crazy ideas I come up with to try in the Social Impact Lab, they're always super supportive. So thank you, Human Services family. I also want to thank my team of Social Impact Lab student employees, Abigail Cahoot, Maggie Little, Ava Gallo. Ava was truly my right arm all this week. Thank you, Ava. Dakota Wintrode and Cos Bansal. I could not have done this without them. And I also want to say a huge thank you to the donors who made this possible. We had two anonymous donors who contributed $5,000 each to the pot of money that we had to give away. So we were able to do this in addition to having just finished this year's Northeastern Students for Giving cycle. And I know many of you have been through that. So I wanted to just share that. In that process, the students had to honor the funding priority that was chosen in the fall. And that funding priority had been the provision of mental health services to at-risk adolescents who might be facing some kind of additional barriers to getting mental health access. So that could be income, it could be culture, sexual identity, transportation, anything like that. And so it was a wonderful funding priority. And the applications came in before we went into lockdown. And they were really concerned because they knew they couldn't change the funding priority because it was an agreement with the applicants that we were going to be funding mental health issues for at-risk adolescents. But they chose to reach out to the top 3 organizations and just make sure that they were still going to be able to use that money and to ask them how they were responding to COVID, because they wanted to make sure that they could complement their giving to the original funding priority with the ability to ensure that the organizations could still use it in the current conditions. And so they made that extra round of effort to be in touch with the organizations. And so the first student-made grant out of the Social Impact Lab this year went to South End Community Health Center for moving their services for at-risk youth, mental health services for at-risk youth to telehealth modality. So that was just 2 weeks ago, we did that $10,000. And then this week, we thought we were just gonna have the not just $20,000, $10,000 for the Social Impact Lab Human Services Award, as well as $10,000 that the Office of Undergraduate Research and Fellowships contributed so the scholars could do one as well. And then we had two additional anonymous donations to the Scholars Program, which totaled another $3,000. So the 2 Impact-athons this week totaled $23,000. The NS4G grant last week was $10,000. So Northeastern students and alumni have contributed or directed the contribution of $33,000 to organizations on the front line of the pandemic in Boston. And that to me is just such a really powerful statement of who we are and what we're motivated to do and what we can do as a community. So I want to give the next round of thanks to all of you for doing this work. It took a huge leap of faith to do this crazy thing and spend a week in Slack with a bunch of people trying to make these decisions, and yet you did it so well. I was on the verge of tears all week because you were doing it so well, and the conversations you were having and the work you were doing was fantastic. And so I'm going to tell you who got your grant, but I want to start by telling you the scholars grants, because you're all going to be super happy about them as well. I was worried that there was going to be the possibility, slim, but still possible, of you choosing the same organization, and then what would we do? And I had to leave that up to you all to decide. That did not happen. And in fact, there was no overlap between their top 3, all of which got funding, and your top 1. But you all had chosen them in different rankings in your lists. So all 4 of them were represented multiple times in the nominations. So let me tell you the scholars first, and then I'll tell you yours. So 3rd place in the scholars getting $1,500 was Victory Program. Second place over there, also getting $1,500, was Greater Boston Food Bank, which a lot of you liked. And their $10,000 grant is going to community servings, which is really great. And your $10,000 grant, drum roll, is going to Action for Boston Community Development, ABCD. And that was Mattapan's first choice, and that did the research on it. But Team Brighton also had nominated that as their first choice, and they had to do their second choice because Mattapan had already gotten it. So that to me is such a fantastic showing. I love that that group of organizations is working on all three aspects of our priority: financial insecurity, housing insecurity, and food insecurity. And I just feel like it represents the values and the intent of this week so much. So I just want to say congratulations to you all and thank you. And I know everybody's probably tired and exhausted, but I also just wanted to take a minute to see if anybody wanted to share any quick reflections about their experience or feedback or lessons learned. I hope we're never forced to do, or that we're not forced to do a lot of these events of completely virtually like this, but we don't know what the fall is going to look like. So any thoughts about what you got out of it, or what we can carry forward as we continue to try to figure out how to make a difference with experiential and collaborative in the virtual world? What makes it work? What was especially hard? What would you recommend we do going forward? Anybody want to share? I know you've been talking all week, so you all have ideas. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to just jump in.
I think it was like significantly more, I don't know, in some ways easier, in some ways harder to cram this all into a week, because I still have like the memory of doing it in a semester, even though I think when I did it, maybe 2014 or something, but I still have that like fresh in my mind from like how much more comfortable that felt doing it over the process of 3 or 4 months or something.
Yeah.
But also in a way, it's like, there's just no time. And when you have a week, there's no time to do low value work. Like you have to be really, really precise with what you're researching. And it pushes you to be efficient in how you look through stuff and how you come up with your scores. And so that was kind of like interesting too, that, there are some advantages, I think, to having such a tight deadline around it too.
Yeah. Alex, so Alex, by the way, for those of you who have mastered Kumu, Alex was one of the first people who did that and really helped me see how powerful it was. And now he works for Kumu. So when you get that Alex at Kumu response when you're having trouble, it is actually my former TA and partner in crime, Alex. So a lot of that.
Sometimes it's an automated version of me, but it's still me at heart.
At heart, that's right. You came up with all the good ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I wrote the automated emails. So
there you go. So since you graduated, actually, since most of the alumni who are on the group graduated, we've been experimenting with the idea of the intensive Impact-athon. And the idea is that we know that there's a lot of really good transformative learning that comes out of the experiential process and the burden of making these really hard decisions, knowing that they're going to have consequences, but not everybody can take the course that I offer over the course of the semester. So we have done an environmental justice Impact-athon that was 3 days long, and we gave away $60,000. I did one with the Learning by Giving Foundation where they gave away $100,000 in one day. And then the reason I was in India and have this sign is because we did a one-day one in Mumbai, where $20,000 was given to women, an organization in Mumbai that's doing work with women and girls in some of the slums of Mumbai. So this is actually the 4th time we've tried this. And the idea is that we're not actually able to uphold the same level of rigor that we do in NS4G, but we're hoping to be able to involve many more people in a short period of time, and we hope to preserve some of those really core values around systems thinking and bringing a social justice lens to giving. And as you said, I think it does force you to be really focused on what you do. And so far, the results have actually yielded exceptionally good grantees. So I think there's some trade-offs there. And I would, love it if everybody could have a whole course on this. But I hope that this alternative way of doing it, it's hard, it's intense, but hopefully you get something out of it. Any other thoughts from alumni who've never experienced the intense version before? I'd also love to hear from students. I see Leah and Molly on here who just finished this semester. What was it like to go right from that into this kind of different version of it?
Yeah, it was really interesting, the difference, because the part that I found myself kind of missing from how we had just done a different virtual version of this grant awarding, I found myself missing, like, my group, when we were making the final scores and whatever, had a few Zoom meetings to talking through the organizations and through the different parts. And the different score parts. So I found myself, when I was just doing it by myself last night, kind of missing that conversational element to see what had jumped out to other people, and to be able to kind of have something to kind of think out loud a little more and compare that.
Yeah.
Which, again, because of the time differences and the accelerated timeline, it's harder to do stuff like that. But that true discussion part of it is the part that I definitely felt myself missing in this version of it.
Yep, I can totally understand that. How about you, Leah?
I would completely agree. I think it was when we did it, working in small groups and getting to talk all the time was really helpful. But I do think it was really valuable knowing the RISE framework so well and going into this week and having that knowledge just so familiar was a lot easier to do it this week. But definitely the collaboration was beneficial during our semester.
Yeah. So, well, that's the kind of thing that, as we think about the possibility that more education will be happening online until we resolve whatever's happening with the pandemic, those are the kinds of things that we'll have to think about and figure out. I have to say, I was impressed because I don't know if you noticed this, I set very few parameters around what kind of collaboration I was expecting of you in your teams. And it was because I understood that you were in different time zones, you had different time obligations. Some of you just finished your finals, some of you are working full time and have families. There was a lot going on in your lives. And so I felt it was important to leave a lot of flexibility for you to negotiate that. And I was really blown away by the Google Docs and the Zoom meetings and the phone calls and how much initiative you all took to find ways to make this work. And that was really impressive to me. I just saw so much innovation happening there, especially given that, there are obviously deadlines and things like that you had to conform to, but there was no assignment and there were no grades or anything. And so you all taking responsibility to find ways to do this as responsibly as possible really was impressive to me. So thank you all for doing that. I'd also love to hear, so there are really two kind of ways to divide the group, not just alumni and current students or recent grads, but alumni and participants who've been through NS4G and knew the RISE framework. And there were a lot of people in the group for whom this was completely new. And I'm wondering if there's anybody who fell into that category who would be willing to just chime in and say what that was like, because for those of you who had expectations around things like, well, we should be having more conversations. There were other people who were looking at this and saying, well, this is a lot of new stuff. I've never seen any of this before. Anybody in that boat want to jump in? I see Cooper and Mac who fall into that category. Can I put you on the spot? And Julia Nucci as well. You're an alumna, but you did not study with me. So if any of you would like to give us feedback, that would be really helpful too. What was it like to be experiencing all this content for the first time?
I can start. Yeah, so I'm Julia. I'm a teacher in BPS, but I graduated from Northeastern in 2016. And I got the email on the CSSH updates, and it sounded interesting to me because I'm working a lot with food security issues with my school and my students. And so I signed up, and it was great to see the organization on Slack and just how much momentum that we got over the week, and just how everything was so clear. It was cool. Noah Brown actually and I did a project together senior year. And so it's good to reconnect with some old Northeastern colleagues too. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Julia, tell if you wouldn't mind, because of your familiarity with BPS, any just insights you have for folks around what you're seeing among families or what your concerns are, and whether or not you felt like we were being at least somewhat responsive to what's happening right now in Boston.
Yeah, I think definitely one of the major issues, or I guess kind of barriers to access we're seeing right now, are families who are homebound and don't have transportation. So we have all the meal sites for Boston Public Schools that families can go pick up lunch, and they can pick up for multiple days, but a lot of families are living in a food desert or aren't living close enough to a meal site to make that work. And so on our end at our school, we've been able to pair up a lot of individual volunteers, but a lot of the organizations that were nominated and were in the running this week, we've been working with as well, that have been doing a lot of door-to-door delivery, which I think is really the biggest need right now.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things about all of these groups is we are talking about door to door. We are talking about taking care of people, one family at a time, and in far greater numbers than we've had to do that before. And the fact that there are so many organizations in Boston that are poised to do that, I think is really impressive. And I also just find it really impressive that those are the kinds of organizations that you all gravitated to. There was clearly a commitment in all of the teams around finding organizations that are translating immediately into direct services for people. And those were the ones that really rose to the surface, the ones that are deeply tied to their communities and figuring out what door-to-door or the equivalent of door-to-door looks like in reaching out to families. So I'm just really happy about that. At some point, I think it would be fascinating to go back through all the conversations and the decision-making processes and just look for what those trends and common themes were, because to me, they reflect a lot of shared values that you didn't all have a lot of time to talk about together. But I suspect that the values that manifested themselves over the course of your deliberations and your decisions are the values that led you to want to belong and to join this in the first place. So it's not a surprise. It was lovely to see those reflected over and over again throughout the week. Anyone else want to jump in with any last thoughts or ideas about your experience?
Yes.
Yes?
Allegra, you can go first if you want.
Okay. Yeah, I have two things. One, I just wanted to say thank you so much for putting this together. I was just so impressed by the process and how smoothly it ran. When I saw that we were going to be on Slack, I was like, oh man, I haven't done that since I graduated. But it actually was really easy and intuitive the way it was done. So thank you to Rebecca and the Social Impact Lab team for putting in so much work there. I have a reflection and a question. And my reflection is that I graduated in 2018, and I am currently working for a Denver-based nonprofit consulting firm, do a lot of fundraising consulting and working with a lot of different foundations in the Denver area. And so one thing I've been reflecting on through this is that foundations usually have really lengthy, arduous grant-making processes. And this crisis has shown nonprofits what they already knew, is that those processes can be set up and done at a high quality. And so I was just kind of thinking about how this process for us was the NS4G version of that. And so that was kind of cool to see. I was Rebecca's TA as well, so I saw the process through its 2-semester cycle, and it was just really cool to see it set up and what that could look like for faster impact when it's needed. And my question is, I have also, since graduating, worked as the grant foundation relations manager at a nonprofit. And one of the questions that I often had was where is this money coming from? When a check just gets sent to us without us soliciting it, and what's the story behind it? So my question for the Social Impact Lab team is how are we communicating about this grant making process, and how are we like kind of telling the nonprofits who are given these emergency grants, like, oh, like we use this framework, and this is why we thought you were really strong. And I was wondering if we've developed any kind of way to communicate that so they can also learn from our process.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I'm so glad you did that, because we're at the stage now with the process where I feel like what's happening in the classroom and the success we're having with the framework is pretty well established. And so now what I'm really trying to do is think more about that interface we have with the community. So one of my priorities moving forward is engaging both the nonprofits more, and in terms of sharing more about the framework, because they often ask me, well, why didn't we get it, or can you give us any feedback? And it's really difficult by the time the semester's over and the students who work in the lab are gone and my TAs are gone and the students are gone, to really give 10 or sometimes 20 organizations feedback. So what I'd like to do is develop, and I'm kind of working on this now, is developing a way to communicate it with them, not just so they understand how we were assessing them and what we were trying to learn, but see if there are more ways that they can start using the framework. Because there are currently a lot of the universities in the Buffett Families Learning by Giving network are now using the RISE framework, and some more and more donors in Boston are picking up on it too. So I think communicating it more to nonprofits would be a great thing. And then the other thing I think a lot of you would be happy to hear is, I think our next big challenge beyond communicating with nonprofits, because I think that's pretty straightforward. That's really just a bandwidth issue and being able to switch some bandwidth to that. I really feel like if we're going to be talking about social justice philanthropy and doing this from a perspective of learning and listening from the community, we have to figure out ways to get more community voices actually in the classroom, and figuring out whether Roxbury Crossing or Northeastern Crossing is a way to do that, which is a new space we have that some of you might not know, that's very community facing, or in partnership with the Center for Community Service. I think that's another kind of aspirational thing for what the next what our next evolution is going to look like. So I think that's spot on. Also, Allegra, I wanted to just pick up on something you said. So many of the things that we're seeing reflect, well, when there's a real emergency, we can do these things faster. The notion that a grant cycle might take a year, on the one hand, yes, we want people to be thoughtful, but on the other hand, does it really take a year to be making these decisions? And are there frameworks, maybe like the RISE framework, that if they're uniform and they work, people might be able to use to pick up the slack, or to pick up that speed a little bit? And I think that also is something I wanted to mention to Molly and Leah about missing those conversations. The idea of this was different necessarily because of the urgency of getting this money out into the community as fast as we can. Boston is still a hot spot, and the numbers are not going up, but they are plateauing, and there's still an enormous amount of need out there. So that urgency, and the hope that we could get people in during senior week, right? People are supposed to be graduating today. We wanted to provide an alternative for that. We did make some compromises, but I think if we can look back and say, yes, one of our learnings is that you can make good informed decisions quickly, that would be another positive to come out of it. So thank you. Cooper.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I have worked with a number of the eligible and nominated organizations in a different context in the past, one focusing on out-of-school time education. And so it was really interesting never having done this process and use these kinds of tools to assess different organizations. It was interesting to get that new perspective on groups and sometimes even individuals within those groups that that I hadn't had before, and just get a new lens on what might be looked for and valued maybe when we're thinking about like what different organizations do well. So it was really interesting for me to gain that new perspective through the Impact-athon.
Cooper, question for you. Did you think that when you look at the organizations that kind of rose to the top as nominees or as the grantees in both groups, based on the former lens that you used or the lens that you used when doing the after school work, would you have thought that some of those same organizations based on a different lens or different attributes also would have sort of risen to the top in your understanding of what a high performing nonprofit is?
I think certainly. I think so. Looking at organizations from an out of school time education perspective, a lot of it is assessment based for learning skills, social emotional learning, um, and there are specific tools produced by different research institutes that were used in terms of like efficacy for just the purpose of education, whereas here it was more broad and kind of structural to the organization, looking at their governance, their mission more broadly. Because I mean, of course, in this particular event, we weren't looking primarily, if at all, at education efforts, and so I think that definitely some of the organizations that stood out highly in this process, like ABCD, for instance, is one that was a leader in the pack in my past experience as well. But it was also interesting to see how some organizations clearly prioritize some areas over others and maybe didn't stand out as much this week, whereas they score very well, for instance, on educational assessments.
Mm-hmm. So, well, and I think that's one of the other reasons it's in all of these things. Well, one thing I want to say first is that in any institution, I believe that the foundation of its work, it comes from the ethos and the values, and then that informs everything else. But that doesn't mean that they can't go in that they don't go in different directions, and they obviously have to have different priorities. And to some extent, one of the things I think is awesome about Boston is that there is this lovely kind of organic distribution of the way services are distributed. And I don't know, I mean, of course, we would always want there to be more resources and more people who can do this work. But we do have kind of a nice balance, I think. I don't know that there's a place I would say, oh, we have a gaping hole in education or food services or housing security or anything like that. And they fortunately complement each other. And I do think that for us having a funding priority around financial housing and food insecurity obviously eliminated a lot of organizations, but at the same time as it allowed you, I feel, to surface some really strong ones. So thank you for that, Coop. All right, it's 5:30. I don't want to keep you all much longer. I know that even though we're all stuck at home, we all still want the weekend to begin on Friday afternoon. One last thing I wanted to share is that I have received a note, and I know personally how much Dean Poiger was thrilled that we were doing this week. It was something that was brought up at the last Chairs Council, and I was asked to convey that appreciation, the appreciation of Northeastern alumni, to say that they are super grateful and impressed and thrilled. And this notion of our alumni and our students and graduating seniors giving up a week to do this really intensive week work together was noticed and appreciated beyond our little circle of people who all love each other and think we're all great anyway. So thank you. All right.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I also wanted to just add on to that and mention that one of the anonymous donors did also want to extend her gratitude and say how impressed they were with the work that everyone was doing, given the circumstances that everyone has had in their personal lives.
Yeah, actually, Lori, I don't know if you saw the same note because it just came in for me, an actual quote from her. I'm impressed that despite all the challenges and adjustments the students have been grappling with, they were able to turn their time and attention to the needs of the community. Thank you, good work. So lots of folks appreciated what you did, and I'm sure the organizations did as well. I don't feel coherent enough to communicate this exciting news with them right now, but I will on Monday share all of this with them and let them know what you all did. I will share the framework, Allegra. I think that's a great idea. And I'm going to put this video of our celebration, which I remembered to record And I'll put that in the Slack so that people who weren't able to join us still know how grateful I am, Lori is, the donors, and the whole Northeastern community. So thank you all. I love you all. Stay safe and well. And we'll come up with more to do. So don't leave our family. You're always one of us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're so
Bye,
welcome.
thanks
You
so
can
much.
turn off. You can turn on your speakers and give us all a shout out goodbye if you want.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Pleasure. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.